I think it would be useful to see what these factors, what you should think about, how you should look at them, and what you can actually do to influence them.
Yeah. So I think it would be best to just go through each factor shortly and to discuss it shortly, because it's really important for clean cooking. But I think you can also maybe use it for other innovations as well, or at least it's deceivers. So if you're not working on clean cooking, maybe you could also kind of use this to check how you tackle that for your own innovation or for your
Yeah, it looks like it when I'm taking a brief look. It seems like very important universal drivers for quite some implementation.
Yeah. So this, of course, this research was specifically focused on clean cooking. So the factors that were included and also our explanation for each factor are focused on clean cooking. But for example, the first factor is cost, and of course, cost is important for every innovation. And if we look specifically at clean cooking, then we see that the initial costs are very important, but also the ongoing costs, for example, for maintenance. And a cleaner cook stove is relatively expensive compared to what people have, what people can spend. So it's really important, if you want to implement cleaner cooking solutions, to think about how can people afford this cleaner cook stove? How can they afford ongoing costs for maintenance? And maybe you can think about new ways to facilitate the purchase of a cook stove. And for example, what we found in the literature is community lending schemes, or maybe price incentives or free repairs. And just an example, for example, if people are buying a cook stove and they convince someone else to buy a cook stove as well, they get a 5% discount. And such an idea. Maybe you need to be creative to think about how can people afford this cook stove. That's a really important part. Well, we found that subsidies, which is quite often used within clean cooking, the role of subsidies was a little bit inconsistent. So from literature, we couldn't really figure out whether subsidies facilitated adoption or whether they hampered the adoption of improved cook stove. If they facilitate adoption, you can think about, okay, it makes the cook stove cheaper, so people are willing to buy it. But if a subsidy ends, it can also, maybe people are not using the cook stove afterwards. Or if they get a subsidy and they can get it kind of for free, a cook stove, then people maybe don't value the cook stove as such because it was a free product. So yeah, that's our first step. If you want to implement cleaner cook stove, think about the ways how people can afford a cook stove for now when they buy it, but also for maintenance. And think about that they don't have the money to just buy a cook stove.
Yeah, I can imagine that to get momentum, you always want to aim for a sustainable financial situation for the solution. Preferably that it's cheaper than the alternative that they're using. That would make the momentum grow the fastest probably, at least getting the costs down as much and take into account over time, maybe even the fuel as well.
Yeah, the problem with cleaner cook stoves and cost is that the traditional cook stoves are often just produced for free. It's often 3 stones that they place and then they make a fire inside it. So if you can get a free stove, why would you buy one? So, and we're talking about that later, about relative advantage. Maybe if you can save, for example, time on fuel collection, or you can save time because you're normally buying the wood and now you use less wood, then it might be a nice incentive to buy the new cook stove, because then you're in the end you're saving money or time. But at this moment, people can't afford it. If you're earning $1 or $2 a day, you can't buy a cook stove that maybe costs 10 or 20 or 30 euros a day.
That sounds very obvious.
That's interesting that you say about obvious, because I think if I'm talking about all these factors, you think, of course, that's very obvious that you should think about this. But if you implement a cleaner cook stove program, you you should still come up with all these factors. So that's why we also call it kind of a checklist. It makes sense for all of these factors. I think none of these factors are kind of very new or surprising, but it's just you need to cover them all, or at least you need to think about them all. So that's why it's really important to have one overview of factors.
Yeah, I could even imagine that you would measure your project current state and where you need to go based on these factors, and to have a comprehensive, full-fledged framework that covers all the necessary fields. I think that's very useful. And the factors might be obvious, but the solutions definitely aren't. Can't imagine.
No, true.
Especially in the whole lattice work of factors that go into this. Can't imagine that a solution easily clicks everywhere.
Yeah, and if I mean, it's very complex implementing, so you already need to think about 100 things, and probably you will just forget one simple thing that's in the list. So that's good. Why you always kind of need to check whether you covered it all.
Shall we get into the second factor? I'm curious
sure.
about that.
So the second factor is called knowledge and beliefs about the intervention. And there is about the innovation. There it's important to take the individual's attitudes toward the cleaner cook stove and the value that they place on the cleaner cook stove and the familiarity with facts and principles related to the cook stove and account. That sounds quite complex, but in the end, it's do they have knowledge about using a traditional cook stove and the consequences of using a traditional cook stove? If they don't have, that might inhibit the transition, of course, because then they're not really willing to, there's no need to change. Also about behavioral change techniques, if you're using shaping knowledge techniques, social support, public cooking demonstrations, all these things might help to increase the knowledge of people about the cook stove. And also think about the value that people place on a cook stove. For example, if they really value cleanliness, then maybe you should really emphasize that the new cook stove really is cleaner than the old one. So this is all about raising knowledge about consequences of old cook stoves, raising knowledge about the new cook stoves, that there is a solution and that people could buy it and those kind of things. What we saw as well, interestingly, that people with a higher education level are more willing to change. So this is a factor that you can't really change, of course, if you're implementing cleaner cooking solutions. I mean, you can send everyone to primary or secondary school, but you can't easily change this. But it's good to understand why people are not changing or why people are changing. So not every factor in the list can directly be changed, but you need an understanding of the implementation or of these factors to implement cleaner cook stoves.
Yeah, I got it. It sounds like you really need to know your target audience, and like any product introduction, you would do this, or you would be most successful if you did this very well.
Yeah, true. Yeah. But also just to share knowledge about the situation. For people, it's completely normal to cook on an open fire in slums in India because everyone is cooking on an open fire. So if you don't have knowledge about the consequences and about alternatives, what is very interesting, we were talking to people in slums in India about the headache, for example, or about tearing eyes or about coughing. And they said it's just part of life. It wasn't something special. It wasn't something that came from the cook stove. It's just, it's part of it. So you really need to teach people about consequences of using open fires.
Wow. Yeah, that's the thing with these problems that are so far out your reality that you can't imagine going through life like, oh, a headache is normal. That's just the way things are. Can imagine. Yeah. Wow. Okay. The third one is that different than the second one? How does that relate?
Yeah. So the third one is compatibility. And it means that your cook stove really fits with the the culture, the geography, the season, fuel type, local practices. So it should, for example, be suitable to prepare the local cook stove. So the second factor was really about, are people even aware of the problem? Are people people know that there is a solution? And the third one, compatibility, is more about, if you have a solution, please ensure that it really fits the needs, and it should be compatible with what they normally do. It should fit in their kitchen. It should not affect the taste of their food, or at least they should be able to make local dishes on the cook stove. Cooking schedules. A lot of women are cooking early in the morning. Does it take a longer time, shorter time? Does it fit their cooking schedules? Can you cook on? Sometimes people are using two open fire. Maybe they're cooking two things simultaneously. Can you do that on a new cook stove, or do you need to do it after each other? And does it take a longer time then? Also, in regions where it's really cold, the cook stove is also used for heating, but also sometimes for lighting. So if you look at the region, is the cook stove compatible with the needs? If you look at heating, for example, is it compatible with traditions that they have? Sometimes religious value is placed on an open fire. All those things, you need to consider that to ensure that people are really going to use it in the end.
Ah, got it. I can very much imagine that if you develop a cleaner cooking solution, that when you implement it in one area and it works, you have to be super strategic on what other areas that specific solution you're gonna try and implement.
Yeah, exactly. For example, if we look at McDonald's, for example, McDonald's in India is really different from McDonald's in the Netherlands. They have the spices that you get on the burgers, and so McDonald's is even adapting the hamburgers to the country. So that's actually what should happen here as well. You should adapt your innovation to the local practices.
Ah, yeah. I as an entrepreneur, I can very much imagine that I would just go to the neighbor, like, oh, we've done it here, let's expand close by because we're there, and then you find out, and then you get stuck, most likely.
Yeah. So for every region, you need to check whether the cook stove is still compatible with the region. And that's an option, but maybe a better option is to develop it together with the local community. But we come back to that later.
All right.
Yeah.
Shall we go to the fourth one?
Yeah, that's the design quality and the packaging. Of course, a product needs to be of high quality, otherwise people are not going to use it. So it should be, for example, safe. That's very important, that it's safe to use, that it's effective, so that the cook stove really works, that it is faster, for example, that you need to use less wood, that it's reliable, that it always works when you want it to work. So it should be easy to use. It should be easy to adjust the heat, for example. That's not really possible with open fires, but people find that really important. It's nice if you can adjust the heat, but also if it's stable, for example, if it doesn't fall if you put a pan on it. And what we've seen is that a lot of cook stoves in previous programs broke after a certain time, and if it breaks, and people are not going to use it anymore. So it's really important, I think, for every product, if you're talking about cleaner cook stoves, but also about your mobile phone, you also want it to be of high quality. So of course you need to look at that for cleaner cook stoves as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Also, the reliability. When I try something new and it's not reliable, I'm very quickly done with it. Not going to use it. Yeah.
And what is important, maybe nice as well, we're talking about quality, but a cook stove should also be appealing. It should have a nice look for people. If it's just a boring thing inside their homes, a lot of people have just one home where they sleep and cook. So it should have a nice look. So again, India, sorry for the example, what people were doing, we installed improved cook stoves with a chimney, and people were making paintings on the improved cook stoves, which was really nice, because then it fitted within their it was something nice for their home as well. So I think a cook stove should be appealing as well. That's really important.
Good one. Yeah, in a way, it sounds like you should use everything available to you to make it appealing to use it. And as
Yeah,
aesthetics, in the end, humans are so geared towards beauty, or maybe novelty could be a thing. I remember the in the 90s when I think it was in the 90s, right? When we went from these very big TVs to the flat ones. And when a friend would get a flat TV in the house, it would be like amazing. People would also have some interest in the novelty, which made it more interesting perhaps to adopt.
yeah.
I can imagine it works exactly the same with anything you put into your house.
Yeah, so for example, the colors. You have cook stove producers who have different color. You can buy a yellow one, you can buy a blue one, you can buy a red one. So people can choose what they want to have in their house. I mean, it's an important element in their house, right? So yeah, that's also part
Yeah,
of our design quality and packaging elements.
might go under the radar so easily.
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
driving. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why it is important, I think, that we have done this research and made this checklist, because sometimes you're so happy that your cook stove is working and that it is efficient that you're just completely that you just completely forget the appealing part, that it should be that it should look nice as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know the couple of bricks that you can make a fire in. I could imagine that kind of tricks you into the thought of, well, it's not super appealing now, so it doesn't have to be appealing. But you're kind of missing an opportunity, perhaps there. Or
Yeah.
I don't know what they look like. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
No, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Now it just looks like 3 stones with a fire on it, and then it looks black, of course, due to the suit. So if you can have an
Yeah,
appealing one, yeah, it makes it easier to choose an appealing one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Got
Shall we
it.
continue to the
All
next
right,
one?
let's do it.
Relative advantage, which also completely makes sense, of course. The benefits of using a cleaner cook stove should exceed the cost or the disadvantages of using an improved cook stove. And if we're talking about benefits, you can think about the savings, the money that you save because you need to buy less fuel or wood, or savings that you make in terms of time, freeing of time, because it's more convenient to cook on a cleaner cook stove, because it's cleaner and your walls are not black anymore due to soot, but also the cooking materials that you cook with, so a pan or utensils, are also, they become black if you cook on open fire. And if you have a cleaner cook stove, they kind of remain clean. So that's also an important part. It's a status symbol, reduce smoke in the house. So there are a lot of advantages, but they should exceed disadvantages. For example, if there's not really if the stove isn't really working well and people are not saving time, then people are not going to use it. Why would they? Because there's no advantage. But we should also not underestimate the value of traditional cook stoves. So I talked about heating and lighting before, but also cooking traditional dishes. People are used to it, so they don't want to change. So traditional fuels also have advantages. And if the advantages of the newer, cleaner cook stove are not are relatively low compared to the advantage of the traditional cook stove, people will still use the traditional cook stove. Completely makes sense, right? It's super logical, but you need to think about this and really check on forehand whether your cook stove really has a relative advantage compared to traditional cook stoves.
Got it. Yeah, and I can imagine your food tastes different, and you're attached to mom's cooking, obviously.
Yeah,
So if it's gonna change all of a sudden, no
yeah,
one in the family is happy. I could imagine.
yeah, exactly. For example, people want to have the wood smoke in their food. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? If you're cooking on a barbecue, then you have the smoke taste. If people are
yeah,
really used
gas
to that, and
barbecue.
then they cook on a cleaner cook stove, then the smoke taste disappears. Why would you then use a cleaner cook stove? if the traditional cook stove has the smoke taste.
Yeah, I completely understand. Like, why do we use barbecues with coals? It takes forever to light them, probably because of this.
Yeah.
But have you heard about any project, any endeavor where they found a little way to counter that, to mitigate that downside?
Um, just thinking about example, I think also people need to it's behavioral change. People need to get used to the new situation. I mean, your grandparents probably also cooked on open fires, and then now we don't even miss the smoke taste in our food. But some cook stoves also kind of made an adjustment to their stove so that's possible to make the breads on the cook stove. So yeah, there are different examples, but maybe people also there should be a kind of behavioral change maybe as well.
Yeah, it's most likely a combination of factors. I was
Yeah.
thinking because getting the smoke taste into it would be hard. It's a great challenge, perhaps, but making all the other benefits so big that
Yeah.
changing would become
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah.
That would probably be it. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. How about we move on to the next one?
Yeah, so that's physical ability to change. And this is a factor where you probably can't really do anything about as a company, but what is really important to at least understand or consider. So, households with higher income levels, who are wealthy, who have their own house, have access to credit, are of course more likely to switch to cleaner cooking solutions. So, poverty is one of the main factors that inhibits the transition to cleaner cook stove. So if we really want to tackle on a global scale the transition to cleaner cook stoves, or if we want to stimulate that, then government should be involved, and they, I mean, in the end, poverty should be solved. that would also really solve the clean cooking sector problem. What we found as well,
I think that goes for.
a lot
Sorry.
of problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like solving poverty is the main driver I got knowledge of, that also for climate and all sorts of other things solves it cool.
Yeah, and this then also closely relates to our first factor, which was costs. So if people are really poor, maybe you can think about ways how you can facilitate the purchase of a cleaner cook stove. Then we also found something about household size, but the evidence was not really consistent. So some reviews said that household size, if there's a larger household, then people are less likely to change. While others say that if there's a larger household size, people are more willing to change. So we can't really say something about that, but maybe it's important to, or maybe for future studies, you can take into account household size. How does that influence the implementation of cleaner cooking solutions? Yeah, for example, why people would not switch if they have a larger household is because then the cleaner cook stove is just too small to cook dishes for a large number of people. That would be a reason why people are not using it in a large household.
Yeah, and on the other side, it could impact cost probably.
Yeah, might be. Yeah.
Okay, something to test in the field, I hear.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah. So the next one is delivery infrastructure. Of course, there should be access to the cook stove itself. There should be access to spare parts if something breaks down. There should be access to maintenance. So how is the delivery structure of the cleaner cook stoves? If people are living in a larger settlements and close to urban areas, people probably have more, or it's easier to get access to cleaner cook stoves. In rural areas, it's more difficult because you're further away from roads or sorry. And you also want to have a sustainable, reliable supply of cleaner cook stoves. So it's just urban areas. It's probably easier than rural areas. And that's what we also see if you look at the numbers people without access to clean cooking are mostly living in rural areas and not in urban areas.
Got it.
So that's
Yeah.
important, where you also can't really do anything about it, but you should think about, okay, if I'm going to implement a project, am I going to start in the rural areas where the need is maybe larger, or am I going to start in urban areas where it might be easier to get people use the cleaner cook stove? Or maybe you could combine it, so you know that it's more difficult in rural areas, but it's more needed. These are things to think about.
And you could, of course, design more durability into your product when it's in a rural area, so at least the maintenance infrastructure can be less.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Next one.
What you could do as well is, or that was mentioned one or a few times, if you could let the local community produce the cook stove itself, then you don't need access to maintenance or you don't need access to sustainable supply. So that's also an interesting solution here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, the next one, we're coming on a more
one?
Macro level. It's external policies and incentives. And here the local government, the national government, but also the international community plays a major role. So this is all about improvements, or for example in supply chains, increasing income levels, what we've talked about before, ensuring the availability of financing support, but also national standards, laws, regulations, for example, and we come back to that later on ethanol, for example. It's really important that you have certain regulations about that, but also on regulations for a cleaner cook stove, the quality of cleaner cook stoves, for example. That would be nice if national governments can ensure that cleaner cook stove have a certain quality, that these are regulated, or so they play a major role in that. Also in subsidies, we've talked about that before, whether it's really effective is not very clear from the evidence. And then what's also important is coordinated efforts and links to broader rural development programs, so that the government can really play, either local governments or national governments or international community can really play a role in coordinating efforts together, for example, between NGOs and local communities, or between programs on hygiene and sanitation and cleaner cooking. Could we maybe combine those kind of things? Government really plays an important role in this, and also, of course, in securing money and putting it on the political agenda.
Got it. And if you're going to implement, you would probably look at, okay, where is it the most beneficial policy landscape to start an endeavor.
Yeah, again, maybe you can't directly change it as an implementer, but you could look at what are the regulations. Are there from local or national governments? Are there ways available to facilitate the purchase? So just check what is currently being done on a policy side, or to stimulate the use of cleaner cook stove, and could we maybe use that within our implementation program?
Yeah. All right. Good one. Shall we move on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and the next is about other personal attributes, which is really broad. It's about gender, it's about age, it's about households with children. What we see is that women in general have a stronger preference for new technology, which also makes sense because they're the ones who are cooking. So the men probably don't really see the problem because they are not cooking, but women do not always have sufficient authority to make the decision to buy a cook stove. Because women are cooking, but men are often making the decisions on how to spend the money that they have. So women really need to kind of convince their husbands that they really need this improved cook stove. But women in general have a stronger preference for these cleaner cooking solutions. And And then what we see is that young women and households with children are also more likely to adopt a clean cook stove. So if you want to implement a cleaner cook stove program, you could, for example, in the villages, focus first on the young women and the households with children. And if they switch and they experience the positive effects of cleaner cook stove, then probably the rest of the village will use it, will buy it as well. So yeah, this is maybe where your focus could be on first: households with children and young women and women in general. Yeah, although you should also include the men because they're making the decisions in the end. So if you don't include the men, then probably only focusing on women doesn't make sense.
Yeah, good one to take into account.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's becoming quite a long list, right?
It is.
Yeah,
but it's a difficult problem.
Yeah, they're all quite logical. What I said before, it's all quite logical, but you should think about it at the moment that you implement a cleaner cooking stove.
I think the details you're naming give a lot of insight on what to really think about, what to take into account. I hope that's going to help people that want to implement a clean cooking solution. So one of them I see on the list is the access to knowledge and information.
Yeah.
How about that one?
Link to the second one, which is knowledge and beliefs about the innovation, but that was more about, do they have knowledge about consequences of using the traditional cook stoves, and do they know that solutions are available? But this element is more about awareness and knowledge about where to buy these cleaner cook stoves, how to use these cleaner cook stoves, how to maintain these cleaner cook stoves. If people don't know that, then they're probably also not going to use the cleaner cook stove or buy the cleaner cook stove. So this can be done to marketing messages, posters in villages, for example, by women telling other women that there's a shop there where they buy where they sell cleaner cook stoves. By cooking demonstrations. So what is currently being done by several organizations, for example, in refugee settlements in Kenya right now, is that there's just in the slum, there on one day a week, I think, they demonstrate the several cleaner cooking solutions that they have, and people can kind of try them, and there's knowledge about how should you use them and how should you maintain them. So this is really happening in the field. And I think it's also really important. So user trainings on how to use the improved cook stoves, that people are also confident that they can use it.
This makes me think about these Tupperware parties at home.
Yeah.
But then for clean cook stoves.
Yeah. And the evidence has shown that this really works. If you demonstrate the cooking solutions and you give trainings to users, then implementation will improve.
Terrific. All right.
Yeah. And then if you want to do, we're coming to the next point, if you want to do these demonstrations, of course, you should have available resources. So you should have researchers for promotion and awareness campaigns, for these demonstrations, for trainings. You should have available supply, of course. You should have, you should ensure that the spare parts, if something breaks, that it is available. You need resources for after-sales services. What we've seen before a lot is that people are buying an improved cook stove, a company is leaving. If it breaks, there's no after-sales service. So people are not going to use it anymore because it's broken, for example. So after-sales service is really important that you secure that. And also resources for monitoring, quality control, for evaluations. Interestingly, also for this factor, you might think, okay, it's super logical that you should secure available resources, but these are all factors that have caused failures of previous programs. So apparently, people are not thinking about this when they implement cleaner cooking programs. So that makes it even more important, highlighting the importance of this tool to check whether everything is really covered.
I think that's where the value of the comprehensiveness of this tool helps. That you might get all of them right, but not have this last one that you just described right.
Yeah.
and again, you're back to square one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that makes it really complex. That if just one small thing is not tackled, the entire program can fail. Yeah. So it's really important to to think about all of these factors. Yeah.
Got it. Shall
Yeah.
we take the last ones?
Yeah. So one of those is peer pressure. And I earlier mentioned the example of the village, right? That if someone is negative, then the entire village is negative. And if someone is positive, that the other side might work as well. The entire village is positive, especially if it's a community leader, for example. Interestingly, in Indian slums, you have a slum leader in every slum. There's one person in the slum who is also living in the slum, and it's kind of the leader of the slum. So if you convince the leader of the slum that cleaner cooking is really important, then the entire village might be more willing to adopt it as well. So you can kind of make use of peer pressure if you ensure that the experiences, of course, of these peers and social networks are positive. So then we come back to the other factors like relative advantage, design quality. But if it's positive, then it can be really helpful, peer pressure. Also, people might see it as perceive it as prestige, because it really gives the cleaner cook stove gives them an image of prosperity, modernity. So you can also kind of maybe use that if that's really important for people. If my neighbor has a cook stove, which is really cool, then I would like to have it as well, because otherwise my neighbor is way cooler than I am. Like if your friend has a new mobile phone, you also want to have it, right? Because if you have a very old one, you also want to have the new one because your friend has it. So that also works for cleaner cook stoves. Yeah.
It's in the end, it's just humans. They act the same
It's just
in
humans.
every.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, then we go to factors that are kind of covered before as well, but the needs and resources of the user. So ensure that you have a user-centered design, have an in-depth understanding of the needs, preferences, contextual drivers of the cook stoves. Earlier, what I said before, cook stoves producers often focus on efficiency, emission reduction, but that's not always important to people. So really talk to people about what they need, what they prefer, what kind of color they prefer, for example. So yeah, it's really talking to people and understanding the needs and resources of the users. And that links to the next one: engage innovation participants. Which is not happening a lot in clean cooking, and that's quite surprising. Maybe you're developing something for users for women in African countries, for example, and you do not involve them in your development work. That's not right. You should really involve the local communities in developing the cleaner cook stoves. For example, again, what we did in India is that we went into the slum houses and we gave them those kind of plastic blocks, and we said to them, please build your own cook stove. How would you like your cook stove to look like? So it's really engaging local communities from the beginning, allowing local communities to provide feedback. And if they're really involved in a project, it's of course also more likely that they will adopt a cleaner cook stove in the end.
Yeah, that sounds so terribly obvious. The way to fail at making a product is to not involve your user and test and iterate.
Yeah.
I think in the kind of startup world, this becomes ingrained. Like, test it as soon as possible, as soon as you can, because everything you come up with is probably a bad plan at first, and then you just develop it over time to make it good. Yeah,
True, but
but
I think in the past, too much focus has been on the technical part. Does it work well on the technical side, and not on the social side? And therefore, it's really important to involve the local community.
yeah, I can imagine you just don't arrive at the problems more downstream if you just start tinkering in your attic on your clean cooking
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah.
You need to see these people and see them use it and see where the problems arise and iterate from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully agree. But that apparently is not, or has been not been done in the past before. So I would really advise cleaner cook stove implementers to involve the innovation participants indeed as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's very tempting. As an entrepreneur, I always have these ideas, and I think this is going to be great, and everyone will want this. And usually I'm wrong, and by some time you learn that it doesn't work like that. Everything you develop that you came up with, that's going to fail, and everything that you develop based on a question of a customer, that'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely hope that people do this these days.
I hope so too.
Would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll go into the
Brings
last
us
one.
kind of to the next part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to the last one, which is reflecting and evaluating. So it's really important that you that people can give feedback on the cook stove, that you monitor its use, that you keep on evaluating. Is it still? Can people still use it? Are sometimes maybe some parts of the cook stove don't work as well as you want to? Can we maybe improve that part? So this is about continuously reflecting, evaluating, improving, which also makes sense, but does not happen a lot. How does it work in real world scenarios? And how can we refine our products? That's, the last thing you should definitely think about if you implement cleaner cook stoves.
Got it. I think we had a great comprehensive overview of this cleaning cook stoves. Let's have a short break and come back right away with the next tool.
Yeah,
How about it?
Sure.
All right, let's get back into it, Esther. So we have a second framework. Maybe you could explain to us, why did you decide to make two frameworks, and the second one is about fuel, and we can dive into the difference a little bit. But how come you made two of them?
Yeah, so indeed we have two frameworks. We have one on cleaner cook stoves and one on clean fuels. And we decided to make two of them because the literature indicated that some of the factors might be different for cleaner cook stoves and clean fuels. And we have indeed seen that some of the factors differ, although there's also a lot of overlap between the two frameworks. And maybe indeed it's good to highlight some of the differences and not to repeat all the things that are similar. So one example, if we look at cost, you can imagine if for a cleaner cook stove, you are still using the wood which you collect or buy. But for fuels, you need to continue to buy the fuels over time. So for ethanol stoves, so for LPG, you not only need to buy the technology, so the LPG stove or the ethanol stove, but you also need to buy the fuel over time. So you should ensure that people can afford to buy these fuels over time. And a practical example, you can think about the big LPG cylinders, which people can buy, but it's a really large amount that they need to buy in one time. Well, if you have the smaller LPG cylinders, that will allow people to pay a smaller amount of money at different times. So it's not a lump sum payment, not something they need to pay a very large amount that they need to pay at once, but people can buy the fuel just in kind of smaller amounts, which is cheaper for them. So that's important. That's an important difference between clean fuels and cleaner cook stoves.
Can imagine. Yeah, it's way more comfortable to do small payments instead of just lump sums.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes total sense. Yeah. How does that work? I can imagine with fuels it works differently with government also. In infrastructure. How is that?
Yeah, that's indeed the case. They play a major role in market and trade policies, for example. So to ensure that the trade is going well for these fuels, but also for regulation, certification, for standardization. So you want to make sure that the fuels are safe to use, for example, and governments play a major role in that. but also in the provision of infrastructure. So if you're a company that is distributing ethanol stoves, you can't just make an entire infrastructure for ethanol stoves in the entire country. So government is playing a major role here as well.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. So that's an important difference to look at.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
there any other differences between the clean cooking and the fuel
Yeah, maybe if we
problem?
continue, on the delivery infrastructure, then of course it is important that there's stable supply. So if people are used to using the ethanol stove and then there's not stable supply, so ethanol is only available during certain months of the year, and then it's not available, and people need to switch again, and or for example, it's not reliable if people are using electric stoves, but electricity is not working for some hours a day, then people are not really willing to use it. Of course, it should be reliable and supply should be stable. That's really important for clean fuels. So that's a major aspect as well, which is part of clean fuels, but not specifically of cleaner cook stoves.
Got it. Got it. Any other major things that you think are interesting to highlight on this one?
Yeah, maybe if we specifically look at biogas, for example, then if you look at relative advantage, biogas is of course good to cook, but if you're producing the biogas, then bioslurry will be kind of a co-product of your biogas production. And this can be used for your lands, which can result in higher crop yields. So if you want people to change to biogas, maybe you can also kind of convince them, like, it's not only the biogas which is really an advantage for you, but also the bioslurry, and your crop yield will increase due to bioslurry. That's specifically a difference for clean fuels, which play a major role.
Got it. And what kind of things do you really need when you want to use the biogas?
You need to have livestock, so cows, for example, but you also need to have water supply, sufficient water supply, strong land tenure. So it's really, you can only use it in rural areas. So for biogas specifically, there are several kind of things that you need before you can change, before households can implement biogas. So of course you also need to look at that. It's more the physical ability side. Do people have the resources to change to biogas?
Yeah, understand. All right. I think that gives a pretty good insight on how you should look differently with these frameworks. I really hope that this will help implementing parties, people that are really engaging in this problem, to do it in a very thorough manner and really get this progress going. Because I think, to be honest, I was oblivious to the scope and scale of this problem. And I think 2.4 billion people that still cook on open fire. It would be amazing if we can accelerate the progress towards a better situation.
That's true what you're saying. And I think clean cooking, and especially if we get the implementation right of clean cooking, there will be a win-win-win-win-win situation. It's good for our climate, it's good for our health, it's good for gender equality, it's good for forest. So why are we not working on it? It's really important to tackle this and to improve the implementation of cleaner cook stoves, and indeed to accelerate the transition to cleaner cooking solutions.
Yeah, I really hope to see that in the coming years. I hope this podcast can do a little bit to help people see the framework, understand it in more depth. For the tool and the paper, we're gonna put links down below in the comments and in the description of this podcast, so someone can engage further. I can imagine that people would also want to reach out to you. How could they best approach you?
Yeah, we can make sure to put my email address in the comments as well. And please feel free to contact me if you have nice ideas, if you want to share your experiences, and I would be happy to connect.
All right, sounds terrific. We'll make sure to put the email address there. And yeah, Esther, I would love to thank you for taking the time to give us this insight. And it was a true pleasure having you here. And hope to see you again. And hope we're gonna have some new steps that have been taken to talk about.
Thank you very much.